Hi everyone, this is an online tutorial for inflation. This topic is on inflation and unemployment, so we are covering only the inflation part. Okay, so follow through the tutorial. If you're not sure, ask your tutors when you come back from Flex Week next week. Alright? Okay, question 1 asks you to calculate the inflation rate based on the consumer price index, the CPI that's given to you. This is Singapore CPI from 07 to 12. Okay, now we are supposed to use this info to calculate the inflation rate. Alright, now let's take a look at the formula of inflation rate. Now use CPI this year minus last year over last year times 100%. Okay, this is a very simple rate of change formula which you should be familiar by now. We use this kind of formula to calculate economic growth rate as well. Okay, now returning to the question, so your consumer price index is here. This year minus last year over last year times 100%. So you can't calculate for 2008 because you don't have 2007 CPI. So you can only calculate beginning from 2009 all the way until 2013. Okay, so you should have calculated on your own. So after you have calculated, the rates will look like this. Alright, now using the formula, this is the inflation rate of Singapore. Okay, in 2009, 0.6, then it became 2.8, 5.2, 4.5, and then 2.4 in 2013. Okay, now take note, your inflation rate measures price increase. Okay, so when the rate is positive, it means that the prices are rising. Alright, so when you look at all the inflation rates that you have calculated here, you'll be able to see that is positive in all the 5 years. Okay, so prices are rising in all the 5 years. Okay, so inflation is present in all the 5 years. Now how do we describe price change, for instance, between 09 and 10, where there's 0.6, then it becomes 2.8. Now this means that prices are increasing and increasing at an increasing rate. Okay, so prices are increasing by 0.6% in 2009 and then it became 2.8% in 2010. Prices are going up at a faster rate. Okay, and then faster still in 2011 before the speed of price increase begin to slow down. Okay, so this is one thing you must remember. As long as the rate is positive, prices are rising, but they are rising at different speeds. Okay, there's only deflation when the rate is negative, then we can describe it as a price fall. Otherwise, as long as the rate is positive, prices are rising. Okay, now we'll go on to question 3. Question 3 is a diagram question. Okay, asking you on using the ADS model to illustrate what happens when there is a high oil prices, okay, and how it will affect your equivalent price level and real GDP. Now, when you do this kind of question, you must take a look at where is the starting point. Now, on your page 5, you have 3 different starting points. When you're doing question like this, you must always catch, okay, where is the starting point that the question is asking you. Here is very obvious, they're asking you to start from below full employment. Okay, so look at your 3 starting points on page 5. Select the below full employment, and then using the ADS model, you illustrate and explain how high oil prices affect the equivalent price level and real GDP. Let's take a look. Okay, we have a below full employment output diagram here. So our current equilibrium is on the left side of LRAS, which measures potential or full employment output. Okay, so now you have price of crude oil rises. Okay, so going by our usual shifting mechanism, cost of production rises because crude oil prices gone up. So it's more costly to produce things now. So as a result, SRAS shift left or it falls. So let's take a look. SRAS shift to the left. Okay, now originally you already have a recessionary gap. So now at the new equilibrium where the mouse is pointing, your output falls further to Y2. Okay, so the recessionary gap now becomes even wider. Alright, so what we can see is after SRAS shift to the left, your output falls further and then your price goes up. Okay, so these are the effects. Higher prices from P1 to P2 and your real GDP starts to fall, leading to a wider recessionary gap. Okay, now when we have this situation, all right, cost push inflation, which is your SRS shifting to the left from full employment output or below. When you have a recessionary gap, a fall in real GDP, and a rise in prices, this is a cost push inflation phenomenon. Okay, cost push inflation is also known as stagflation. All right, it is a combination of inflation, which is your price rising, and plus recession, which is your output falling. Usually, cost push inflation or stagflation is accompanied by the recessionary gap. All right. All right, let's move on to question 4. Now, question 4, you have a newspaper excerpt on South Korea. Okay. Now, here you see inflation jumping to near 5-year high. So inflation is rising in South Korea. The question is asking you what is causing this inflation in South Korea. Okay. Now, if you read the article, you'll see that there's a lot of consumer buying that is mentioned in the article, right? Consumer price growth is here. Okay. There's a domestic demand rising. Okay. And the consumer price index is up. So a lot of consumer buying in South Korea. All right. So what are the factors that cause inflation in South Korea? You have an increase in household spending. Now, what kind of inflation is this that's led by household spending? Now, as long as the event is caused by an AD component, okay, which means that your AD is rising, this is the beginning of a demand pull inflation phenomenon. Okay, the diagram we have gone through in lecture, we will look at it again. Now, something you must remember about your demand pull inflation is that there's 2 stages. Okay, your short run and then your long run. Okay, now let's take a look at each stage individually. Okay, let's take a look at short run first. Now, we have an initial starting point at full employment output. So let's set up the diagram first. Okay, so this is your full employment output. Now, as with the article earlier, your consumption rises, so your AD shift right. Okay, now whenever you shift the diagram, take note of the new equilibrium point. Now the new equilibrium point is here, so take a measurement. Alright, so price went up. Okay, the price level went up, and now you're producing more. We are now producing above your full employment output. Okay, so now there's an inflationary gap. Okay, we are producing more than potential. The effects are price level rises. Okay, you can see here from P0 to P1, real GDP increase, and there's an inflationary gap as mentioned. Okay, now this is the effects, the short run effects of a demand pull inflation. Originally, we started off at full employment output, and then there was an increase in AD. From the article, is caused by a rise in consumption. So AD shift to the right, we now have a new equilibrium. So at the new equilibrium, we can tell that prices have gone up, real GDP has gone up. Okay, so at this point, this is your temporary point. And this is the short run situation, okay, of a demand pull inflation. Of course, the story is not over yet. There's a long run adjustment, but for short run, we are temporarily here. Okay. Now, this is where we left off from the short run temporary position earlier. Okay, this is the equilibrium now. Okay, and our starting point for long run adjustment. Now, this point here is not sustainable. Because you are producing more than your potential, you're overstretching your resources, you're overworking your labor, overworking your machinery, your capital. Okay. Now, in this case, we just use the shortage of labor as an example. In real life, you're short of all resources when you are producing more than your potential. Okay. So we just use labor as an example. So when you're overproducing, you have a shortage of workers. When you have a shortage of workers and you still want to maintain production at Y1, okay, you have to offer higher salary. So wage costs will go up. Okay, wage costs will go up. Now, when wages go up, cost of production goes up, your SRAS will begin to shift to the left. Okay? So your SRAS shift to the left, your equilibrium will now move to this final point here, the equilibrium point here, whereby price level has gone all the way up to P2. Okay? Now, so from the starting point here in the long run adjustment, you have a shortage of workers, so your wages rises when you want to maintain production at Y1, so cost of production goes up. So in the end, your SRAS has to shift to the left. Okay, so you're back at full employment output. Okay, and your prices have gone all the way up to P2. Your output is now back at YF. Okay, now if you observe demand pull inflation at the end of the long run adjustment, the economy has gained nothing. Your production is still at YF, where you started from. Okay, but your prices have gone all the way up from P0 to P1 and then to P2. All right. Now this is the end of the online tutorial for the inflation part. So when we come back next week, after the flex week, your tutor will go through the unemployment parts in your tutorial. So please go and listen to the unemployment lecture on LMS. Okay, and attempt those questions before going for tutorial. So your tutor will go through the rest of the questions next week. If you have any question on today's inflation tutorial, please ask your tutors when you get back to campus. Okay. Now please take note that you have a group work to do. Okay, you're supposed to do some work for your project country. Now there's a video on that on where to go and look for your data. Okay, so please take a look at the video before you begin your work. Once you have finished, one person from each group submit on LMS, so your tutor can see what you have done. Okay, see you guys back on campus.